Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone around the world in attendance. And thank you very much for joining us for Global Cleveland's 2021 International Sisters Conference. We very much appreciate your being here. My name is Colin Jennings. I'm a partner at the international law firm of Squire Patton Boggs, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as a board member for Global Cleveland. And also, two of my children have had the benefit of Jesuit education, which is why I suspect they've asked me to make this introduction. So I'm very happy to introduce this group. Before we begin, we need to thank our sponsors who were critical in making this event happen. Swagelock, Medical Mutual, Platform Brewery, Ilrish, The Lynx Inc., Corner 65, Us Together, and 12 Literary Arts. We really appreciate your support. We couldn't do this without you, so thank you very much. Again, today I'm pleased to introduce our Jesuits Worldwide panel, where we're going to discuss the Jesuits' role in global education and service, and how they're motivated and driven by their faith, and how they work and cooperate across global boundaries. And as I said, my children have had the benefit of a Jesuit education, have really seen this in action. And it's really, I think, a great panel to get together and talk about these really important issues. Before we jump into the panel, I've got a couple of housekeeping issues that I'd like to talk through. First, we're proud to be hosting our third annual Sisters Cities Conference. We celebrate the partnerships and connections that the city of Cleveland has built with our sister cities via economic and cultural exchanges. Cleveland has held the door open to newcomers for generations. And over the last 57 years, 23 global cities have joined that journey. And our sister cities relationships broaden our perspectives and possibilities, and we're thrilled to have each of our partner cities. We're also excited to announce that next year, our fourth annual Sister Cities Conference will be hopefully held in person during the week of October 17th. We ask that all of you join us again next year for this important event so we can gather together and discuss all of these important issues and the delights that Cleveland has to offer. We're also encourage you today to broaden your horizons by participating in a chance to win a trip to Italy in partnership with Italian Tours by Diana to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Global Cleveland. The lucky winner will get to travel to our Italian sister city, Vicenza, Italy. Italian Tours by Diana is a boutique travel agency in Rocky River focused on crafting custom journeys to Italy and Europe. This 8-day journey will introduce you to Vicenza, Venice, Florence, and Rome, and many beautiful destinations in between. You can purchase your tickets on our website, globalcleveland.org. Again, globalcleveland.org. And this looks like an incredible trip. If anyone's interested, please purchase tickets. I know that Tours by Diana does an outstanding job. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this important session, Mark Mcdermott. Mark is the Vice President and Ohio Market Leader for Enterprise Community Partners. Enterprise addresses America's affordable housing crisis from every angle. Mark directs Enterprise's Ohio team, which brings leadership and investment, policy change, and impactful solutions to communities in greater Cleveland and throughout Ohio. Enterprise delivers its work in partnership with local communities, nonprofits, government, and the philanthropic sector. Mark joined Enterprise in 1998 as director of Enterprise's Cleveland office and was promoted to vice president in 2003. Prior to joining Enterprise, he spent 8 years as executive director of the Cleveland Housing Network. In addition, he served as research associate for the Center for Neighborhood Development at Cleveland State University and as executive director of the Citizens to Bring Broadway Back. He has a master's degree in urban planning and has a bachelor's degree from Borromeo College in Ohio. So with that long and complicated introduction, Mark, I'll turn it over to you. We get focused on the Jesuits and their mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. As important, I only have, of my two children, only one received a Jesuit education. And I won't tell you which one I love more, because both. I also was promised that if I did this, that I was going to win the trip to Italy. So I'm disappointed to hear that it's a competitive situation here.
I'll see what I can do.
No
promises, but I'll see what I can do.
Thank you. Well, I'm very excited to help moderate this this panel around Jesuit work, education, and most importantly, engagement worldwide. And with us this morning, as you can see, we have, and the panelists will introduce themselves. And I think, I'm not sure if we lost Father Chaco or not. I know he did say he might have some connectivity problems where he was traveling to in India. So we'll find out in a second. But I would ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and we're going to go in alphabetical order to make it easy. So Father Bretsky, would you be so willing to start us out?
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm Father Jim Bretsky. I have been a Jesuit. I'm in my 52nd year as a Jesuit, and I'm an American. I'm from the Midwest, Milwaukee, Wisconsin originally. I had the usual Jesuit formation, but I have taught around the world, from our university in Seoul, Korea, Sogang, to the Gregorian in Rome, and then here in the United States, I've done 25 years of education in our theology centers in Berkeley and in Boston and at the University of San Francisco. And I did my doctorate in Rome, so that was eye-opening too on that level.
Thank you so much. Welcome back, Dr. Chaco. Can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I am C.G. Chaco. I am a Jesuit priest belonging to Patna Jesuit province in India. At the moment, I am the Conference of South Asia's Development Director. Also, I head an organization or an initiative called Migrant Assistance and Information Network. Basically, like supporting the migrants who are in distress, especially after COVID-19 and the first wave. We began a new initiative. So I have been working mostly with the marginalized communities, especially trying to support them through educational initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excuse me. Chris Kerr.
Hi, thanks. My name is Chris Kerr. I'm the executive director of the Ignatian Solidarity Network, which is a lay organization. So I think I'm the only lay person on the panel here today. But we work with the Jesuit network and larger Catholic Church in the United States and beyond to help people develop a deeper understanding of the relationship between their faith and working for justice, helping them to understand issues of injustice and ways that they can be engaged in working for social change in their local, national, and international community. I'm a product of Jesuit education, since that's something we were talking about. And so a proud graduate of a Jesuit high school and Jesuit university, and have been connected with the Jesuits ministry across the globe for over 30 years. The other thing I was just going to say is that we work, the Ignatian Solidarity Network, like what Father CJ was saying, we work with a migration network here in the United States and Canada that works in partnership with similar networks of the Jesuits in Central America, Mexico, and South America, as well as the Caribbean, to collaboratively work across both hemispheres to support the needs of migrants, to advocate, and also to provide important insights on the realities of migration in this region.
Thank you so much, Chris. And Father Zippel, you've probably experienced a lifetime of going last on everything there is. So sorry, I should have started and gone backwards, but if you could please
that's
introduce
okay.
yourself.
That would have been very jarring for me. I'm Jeremy Zippel, a Jesuit priest. I am originally from South Mississippi, but I've been assigned in Belize in Central America, in the Caribbean. I should always say the Caribbean. Belize is an interesting place. I'll say about that in a minute. But for the past 3.5 years, I've been down there. Jesuits have been in Belize for 150 years, close to 150 years now. Jesuit missionaries really built the Catholic Church in Belize, built most of the schools that are still extant in Belize, built the educational system of Belize, and the church, and in many other ways have been instrumental in Belizean society. For example, a Jesuit helped write the Constitution, or helped the founding prime minister write Belize's first constitution. Belize is a pretty new country, only gained independence in 1981 from the British. So down in Belize, we have, I have two main jobs. I am the chaplain for our Jesuit educational, our major Jesuit educational endeavor, that's St. John's College, founded in 1887, I believe. It's been around a while. It's a high school and a junior college. It's the premier institution of higher education in Belize. We got about 600 boys in the, I think I can say that definitively. I'm sure some people would dispute me, but just in terms of the place that it holds in Belizean society and the kind of the things our graduates do and the test scores that they achieve, it's the best school in Belize. 70% of the current government is a graduate of our school. So the Jesuits continue to have a pretty big influence, I'd say, on Belizean life and society, civic society. So we have a high school of 600 boys and a junior college of around 1,400 students. Maybe it's more than that. So I'm the chaplain for those places, sort of just the Jesuit presence. We don't have many Jesuits left, so I do a little bit of everything. And then we have a parish on the other side of town in a pretty low income and violent neighborhood, St. Martin de Porres, and I'm associate pastor there. It's a wonderful parish. It's a much different kind of ministry than the school, despite the many challenges of the neighborhood. We have a school there too, primary school of 600 students. Despite the challenges, it's a real beacon of hope for the neighborhood, a very joyful place. So those are the two things that I'm doing in Belize now as a priest. Yeah, and good to be with you.
Thank you so much, Father Zippel. Excuse me. It's early in the morning and I haven't had all my coffee. I know, Father Chaco, it's probably about 6 o'clock or so where you're at, but please put up with us still waking up here in in our areas. The first question, so what we're going to do here is for about half hour or so, I have a set of questions I want to ask the panelists, and then we're going to open up for the last 15 minutes or so for questions that are kind of open Q&A that might be coming in. And the first question, I'm actually going to skip in the interest of getting to some of the other ones, because the first one was, where do you work currently and where have you worked in the past? And I think most of you have covered that in your introductions, although feel free to talk about other places that you may have worked in your answer to some of the other questions, if we may. So I'm going to jump and as we ask these questions, please, I'm sure you're all very polite gentlemen, but please go ahead and jump in with your answers, because I'm sure everyone's interested in hearing. First question really is then, how has your faith influenced your work in the international settings that you worked in? Whoever would like to start off with the answer on that one, please.
Well, I can try. Oh, okay. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. For me, I wasn't expecting to go to Belize. I have done other jobs where in the society where I've traveled around a good bit. So I feel that's one of the blessings of Jesuit life, is that I've spent time in West Africa. I've spent time in the Middle East. And I've lived in communities. My community in Boston, where I did seminary theology studies, was well over 50% international. We had Jesuits from all over the world studying there. And in my house, I had over half of the guys in my direct community of 10. So It's one of the great assets of the society, our international flavor. But specifically, me being in Belize, this is my first time living an extended period and working outside of the States. And I guess for me, the biggest revelation is just a reminder that most of the world does not live like we live in the West, in the States. That a lot of things that we very much take for granted, whether that be healthcare, and I know US's healthcare system isn't perfect, but right now we have a teacher who at our school who's middle class, very solidly middle class, and she was just diagnosed with a pretty aggressive cancer. She can't get that treatment in Belize because we don't have cancer treatment in Belize. So she's up in Mexico right now, and she'll have to raise every dollar of her treatment out of her pocket because there's no such thing as health insurance, you know. Things like that, you know, things like, oh yeah, well, I think healthcare is a big one because when you get sick, a lot of times you just don't really have an option. You're sick, you know, the treatment isn't there. Whereas in the States, we will do everything we can to heal you, you know, spend any amount of money, but the option just isn't there. So for example, the pandemic has really been an eye opener. Like, you know, another example, I anointed a woman last week who couldn't even get into the hospital. You know, she was older, but there was just no option for her to go to the hospital to be treated. She did have oxygen in her house, but she was going to die there, you know, not even just, you know, no treatment possible. So those are kind of the things that have been, I knew those things before, but now just living outside of the U.S. context I've gotten a better awareness for. So maybe a sense of the privilege that we have in the States and our obligation to be generous to much who have been given much as expected, as the scripture says. And I think that applies not just to individuals, but to nations as a whole too.
Father Chaco, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you again. See, what I found is the context in which like we are ministering or we are working in India. Though the situation has improved quite a bit over the years, I do see as a Jesuit for the last 30 years that there are a lot of people who still deserve our love, support, and like a lot more empowerment required. I worked with one of those communities for the educational empowerment, where a community called Musahars, one of the lowest in the socio-economic rank status in India. Their literacy rate is less than 10% even now, according to the latest census of the country. And then access to education at the moment, for example, in India seems to be quite fine, but at the same time, quality of education, especially for the marginalized, is a huge challenge. So that is the kind of situation where we have been working in. And I found that the faith, that the love that the gospel talks about, and the general congregation of the Society of Jesus keeps reminding us that our primary mission is to the marginalized and the people who really require our love and support. So I always felt inspired to be in such a context and then give myself and also our own people our love and service to them. This has really inspired us. And I just want to tell you that the places where we are working, we are not working with the Christians or the Catholics, but most of those places, we are reaching the message of the gospel and also the human values in and through, various other developmental engagements. That also is satisfying me. Thank you.
For our work at the Ignatian Solidarity Network, the work that happens beyond the borders of the U.S., there are two things that I think are we recognize or we have learned through that work. One, that our world is interconnected, whether we like it or not. We are interconnected, and the decisions that we make as citizens of the United States or as people of the United States impact people throughout the world, and vice versa. And the second thing, and then I'll kind of talk just really quickly about kind of apply that concept, is that we are also part of a universal church, and the work of the Jesuits is universal. And So when we think about these two concepts, it helps us to understand some of the challenging issues that face our globe right now. And we've been able to work in collaboration with Jesuit and lay Ignatian partners across the globe on those issues. And in doing so, you come to recognize that your own reality may not be the reality of your brother or sister somewhere else in another part of the globe. And this is true in the context of COVID. So working with other partners, Ignatian and Jesuit partners across the globe to advocate for access to COVID vaccines, and recognizing that in doing so, that there's a different mentality, kind of what Father Zippel was talking about around access to medical care. There's a different mentality that we have in this country about our right to access to a COVID vaccine, and then our attitude towards taking that vaccine or not. Literally in other parts of the world, people are, would die, no pun intended, for a COVID vaccine. In our country, we've kind of flaunted around as a choice, like something we can choose or not choose to do as part of our liberty. So same thing with migration. I think we often think about migration in the context of our border with Mexico, and that's the worst reality of migration in the world. And all we have to do is visit Jesuit Refugee Services website and come to understand that the realities of migration are something that people across the globe face, that there are millions of people in migration right now, forcibly displaced, and that this is a global challenge that we have to work as a global community to overcome, to create safe places for people to live in their home countries so they don't have to migrate. And then in the context of climate change, right, that our planet is changing. It's impacting the most vulnerable in particular. And in our own country, we often have the capacity to kind of buy ourselves out of those problems. But that's not true for folks in other parts of the world. But even that's changing here in the United States. And so we have to, it's a global problem. We have to be our work is to encourage folks in this country to better understand that global reality and be more responsible global citizens.
I started my life outside of the United States. I've lived for about a dozen years outside the United States, and I started that in Korea in 1980. And at that time, Korea was a very different country than it is today. It was, I think, emerging out of a third world economy and lifestyle, and now it's very much first world. And our Jesuit University in Seoul is largely non-Christian and non-Catholic, because that would be the reality of the population. So I was working in that context and studying Korean and also studying classical Chinese, which was one of the most influential things in my own life, because it goes right to a very different way of looking at language and communication. Whereas if you're speaking French or Italian or Spanish or whatever, it's you're working through an alphabet and it's more translation. But when you're using Chinese ideograms, your understanding of language and how it communicates it's a real different paradigm. So that opened up to me, I think, my biggest insight or gift from living abroad is the fact of being invited and even forced to really revisit just basic core assumptions about the world and the way the world works. So that was very helpful. And then another helpful thing, I went from Korea I was sent by the Korean Jesuits to do my doctorate in Rome. And so if you want to have culture shock, I would say that would be a pretty good way of doing it, because you went from a place that was, Christianity was accepted and what have you, but it wasn't well understood or wasn't part of the culture, to a place where you had the church triumphant, which was, I think, pretty much the experience that I had in Rome and dealing with that. And then a middle place besides the United States that I've taught, sort of in between those two, is the Philippines, where I taught in our theologate there for 6 summers in a row from 2000 to 2006. So I spent, if you put it all together, well over a year and a half in the Philippines. And that's a country of marked contrast with the very rich and the very poor. And it's culturally a Catholic country, but there are so many things about the faith and justice that still really haven't taken full root there. So I'm big takeaway from my time abroad is if you live abroad, not as a tourist, where you live for a significant period of time where it's not your language, not your food, not your culture, not anything else, that does help make you vulnerable, and in some sense it makes you impoverished, but in another sense then it does open you up to possibilities to see the world, to see yourself, to see the faith in a very different way. And that's probably the greatest gift that I have. And I'm teaching now. I live in University Heights, which is a suburb of Cleveland. It looks just like the suburb of Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, along the shore of Lake Michigan, where I grew up. And so at John Carroll, our students are very, ethnic diversity would not be our watchword, but they are, I think, open to these things. And so I'm trying very hard to bring some of that in my courses, especially my courses on Asian religions and globalization.
How fascinating, each of you bringing these different perspectives and life experiences, and yet unified by this background with the Jesuit order and your faith. I'm gonna skip ahead a couple questions and we can jump around. So I'm gonna keep you all on your feet if I may. But based on those experiences and serving folks and communities and people around the world, what advice would you give to individuals who are, whether they are Catholic or Christian or not, to working with people from other religious, cultural backgrounds? If you could give that advice and really believe it could, and I'm sure you do this all the time, but could impact how somebody does that work and honors other individuals from other backgrounds and experiences. What advice would you give?
Can I come in? Yeah. Okay. As Chris also talked about, I think it is very important, especially with the COVID-19 situation. All of us have realized that we are more connected than ever. If one person is affected, the other one is affected. Mm-hmm. So we cannot live in silos. It is more a connected world, and COVID has taught us that very deeply in that sense. And also, I think we are able to, especially as a Jesuit order, I told you I was working in an area, let us say 100-kilometer radius, where we were working in a very, a typical social action and social empowerment context. Except the two Jesuits who were there was no single Catholic or a Christian in that sense. But at the same time, we realized that one of the major responsibilities of the Jesuits or the mission given to us is to reach out to the most, marginalized people. And the context in which we are working, for example, we have over 1,000 spoken languages in India, for example. We have 20 plus official languages. So there is a multiplicity, there is a diversity of culture, religion, languages, etc. That is the context, but that is the beauty also. So therefore, I feel that the Jesuits are more and more invited to live that life, and then we are finding a lot for more meaning by being that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Especially South Asia. Thank you. Yeah. Any other place also.
I think, I don't know how you would do this necessarily intentionally, but I think for myself, in terms of my global education sensitivity, etc. The two things that are, and they go hand in hand, that have been most beneficial, is the ability to live outside of your country for an extended period of time, where you are not in power. So not as a tourist or something, but just as a foreigner living in that place. And then if you can really master another language, that then per force will give you an avenue to think in a different way, and it will force you to think in a different way. And I've over the time have mastered at various levels of fluency 7 languages, but the two that I speak the best besides English, the two that I speak the best are very different from one another. So you've got Italian on one side and Korean on the other. And when I actually kind of think in a Creole of a variety of languages, because there's words and concepts and thoughts come in that are from these different languages. And I think that is sort of the early gift of the church, is that Pentecost gift, where each person heard the gospel preached in their own tongue, even if they could speak whatever they were speaking in Jerusalem at that time as a kind of a lingua franca, a common denominator. And there's something about that, hearing and trying to preach in the mother tongue of your target audience, that I think is the gift of the Spirit.
Father Bretsky, can I follow up?
Sure.
Thank you so much. It's fascinating. The living in other than your country of origin, what is it that one can gain? Because not everyone necessarily would, depending on how they approach that experience, right? But what is it that one can gain?
Well, I mean, in our Christian faith, we do believe in the power of kenosis, the emptying of oneself as Jesus emptied himself on the cross. And if you are going to another country, not as a tourist or for a very short period of time, then you're going to have, as we say in Latin, nolens volens, whether you want to or not. You're going to have a certain amount of kenosis. And as you empty yourself out of your own kind of cultural worldview, etc., then other things are going to take its place, because nature does abhor a vacuum. So kenosis doesn't mean you end up in a vacuum. Kenosis means other things will come in. In my classes, I use the vehicle of Shusaku Endo's novel Silence. I'm not sure if everyone will be familiar with that. It deals with Japanese Christian persecution in the 17th century. But the main protagonist of it, Father Rodriguez, he has to go through kenosis. And in the process of going through kenosis, it leads to what I believe is a radical openness to the Spirit, a radical conversion. Now, others think it leads to apostasy, but I would disagree with that. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. That's so fascinating. Thank you. Chris or Father Zippel?
Jump in. Belize is a wonderful country. I'd encourage everybody to come visit sometime if you can. It's kind of it's in the Caribbean and it's in Central America. It's a former British colony, and so in many ways it feels like Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, all the other Caribbean islands, and people speak a Creole, an English Creole. But on the other hand, it's in Central America. It's literally like right below Mexico, right next to Guatemala, right above Honduras. So it's these two worlds colliding, and thus we have Creole people, Caribbean people, Black Caribbean people. We have Garifuna, which is a a group. The English had brought them over as slaves, and they refused to be enslaved, and they ended up just kind of putting them on an island, St. Vincent in the Caribbean, for a while because they couldn't really get them to do anything else. They intermarried with Amazon Arawakian indigenous people, and eventually got kicked out of there and made their way to Honduras and Belize. And they're a really fascinating culture. They still have a language that is mostly African, and traditional food. And we do a Griffin Mass at our parish once a month. That is the most popular Mass of the month. And all the music is in Griffin. We have a great Griffin choir. I don't really do Mass in Griffin, but my colleague, Father Brian Christopher, does pretty well. Our bishop in Belize is Griffin, by the way, so he'll come over and do Griffin Mass sometimes too. So you got Creole, you got Griffin, you have Spanish mestizos, people of more Spanish descent. We have a couple groups of Maya down here, Mopan, Yucatec, and Quechua Maya, three different groups of Maya in Belize. The Jesuits down in southern Belize have a mission to 36 Mayan villages that are really far flung. These are people who get Mass 2-3 times a year. Two Jesuits, really one Jesuit, 1.5 Jesuits serving down there, these 36 villages. Father Sam Wilson is a great Jesuit, originally from Alabama, who's been down there several years now. I remember when Sam first arrived, he went to a village to celebrate Mass in this little tiny church, thatched church. And this is a village that he had to ride a horse to get to. And he's in there, and he notices there's a box underneath the altar, and the box moves from time to time, like shakes a little. So finally, he just stopped the mass, and he was like, "Excuse me, what's in the box?" And they said, "Bats, Father, bats." Okay. The Lord be with you. And then he just continued. But afterwards, he found out that these bats had been really invading the church, and so they figured if they put them under maybe they were possessed or something. If they put them under the altar, then they would stop destroying the church. So there's just a lot of things like that. Sometimes that are just peculiar, but often very beautiful too, like our Griffin Mass. I mean, it's just a stunningly beautiful Mass. And the way some of their concepts, as Father Bretsky was talking about, the way certain things, when you translate the Mass into another language, the choice of words that you use, they actually use words from the Griffin temple from a kind of a non-Christian service that they do when they translated the Mass. Those words have deep resonance for them. So it changes the faith a little bit, but enculturates the faith. The cores are still there, but it's also different. When I lived in Boston with a bunch of guys from all over the place, I had a roommate, for example, from Madagascar. He is now a Jesuit priest. He's the principal of a high school in some interior part of Madagascar that is hours from anywhere. I do talk to him. I message him on Facebook from time to time. But the problems that he's concerned with, I just noticed when I lived with him, this was a few years ago in Boston now, what were we Americans concerned about? I don't remember what the political fights were at that time, whether it was abortion or healthcare or whatever, what Catholics were fighting out about liturgy at that time. They weren't even on his radar. His world was just so different, where he come from. And I think those are the kind of things we tend to make our American problems the problems. And I'm not saying that the United States isn't a great place that is brought positive change to other parts of the world. But sometimes we just get so, we just get in our tunnel, and really the only way to get out of it, I think, is to have friends from different places, to try and follow the news. You turn on the news in the States and it's 99% domestic news. And if it's international news, it's only because we're pulling out of Afghanistan or something. It's so find other news sources. But ideally find friends from different places, and I think they'll teach you a lot. You'll teach them too. Dialogue is such an important thing. Pope Francis emphasizes it a lot. But living in that really international house in Boston for 4 years, I think we all walked out of there with much different visions of the world, and that's a beautiful thing. You see how we're one. The Holy Spirit brings us together, but different.
Thank you. I love so much of what you said, and how we can think something is peculiar, and yet to in a very legitimate, more legitimate way, it's beautiful, and from the same spirit. So that's fantastic. Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll offer a truly lay perspective on this. So I have 3 young boys, and before bedtime every night we do prayers. And a couple months ago, one of my boys noted, he's like, Dad, our prayer list is getting a lot longer. He's like, the more people we get to know. And I think kind of to Father Zippel's point, how do we build kind of a greater sense of our connection, to people around the world, people beyond our own immediate kind of circle, right? So we can think about that on a family nuclear level, but maybe let's expand that as we get older, and think about, some of the suggestions you've already heard. I know from spending time in other parts of the world, kind of living embedded in communities, that now every day when I open up the newspaper or turn on the news, I'm kind of looking not just for that domestic news that Father Zippel talked about, but also for what's happening in other parts of the world. I want to still be aware of the realities that people are facing in places that I've come to know. One of those I think about, I spent a summer volunteering with the Jesuits on one of the Micronesian islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And it's an island of 30,000. Well, I don't know if it's that many people. You can drive around it in an hour, and you're 600 miles from the next closest island. And I still know people there. I still follow what's happening there. I've been especially following how global sea level rise has impacted those people as an island nation. So I think when we allow ourselves to a core concept of Ignatian spirituality is love for God, love for ourselves, love for others. And so if we can develop that sense of love and connection to other people, that comes through, what Father Bretsky talked about, this idea of, placing yourself within a place that's different than your own, and not just as a voyeur or tourist, right? Coming to understand culture through language, picking up the newspaper and not just worrying about how the news impacts you or your family, but other people too, right? So it's kind of having this global vision. And I think that Pope Francis has really helped not just the Jesuits and Jesuit and Ignatian family, but also Catholics in the world as a whole to try to dig into, what it means to be part of this universal church and also part of a global community, which has been really helpful as well.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you all. I'm going to answer. I'm not a panelist, but just to provide a perspective. My wife and I have lived in the city of Cleveland for 43, 44 years. And what I see in an urban area like Cleveland is that one can live here, as many young people do in all these new apartments and stuff. One can live here and not experience all who are here, right? And listen to all their neighbors, right? but and one of the gifts I think we offered our children, Chris, and educators here, is to have grown up in an area where we weren't just us, right? In so many different ways, and they just treasure that. My son treasures that almost as much as his Ignatian education at St. Ignatius. But no, they just treasure that so much, and I can see it in their children. So one does not need to live outside of where we live to experience folks who are different and very different, and yet at the same time the same spirit and the same humanity. So I think that's just wonderful and beautiful that you've all described. Well, I think it looks like we lost Father Chaco again and perhaps he'll be able to join back. But and I still have a couple of questions, but could also stop and see if there's if we want to open up to an open Q&A period here. Although I'm going to express absolute ignorance to say I'm not sure how that's going to happen. And I see that our moderator just left a little while ago. So when there are bats under the altar, one just asks the question and then moves on with the liturgy, right? So I think that's what we'll do at this point in time, and see how this flows. My other question that I really want to make sure we get to is how the Jesuit order now and in the future that you believe can be there, how it is positioned to build international connections and to unite communities around the world. Because the Jesuit order can play a special role, has played a special role, as you've all described. And what's the future of that role of building those those connections and uniting communities from around the world?
Well, one of the things that the Jesuit order has in its structure and also its history that I think does help foster that is a very high level of centralization. So because we are so tightly centralized and organized, if you want to globalize, if you want to say, well, this is going to be our policy or something, it's a lot easier to do when you've got the superior general saying this is what we should do. And then he has these different provinces and these groupings of provinces. So I think that helps foster it. And the fact that we are an international order, I think it also does make living and working in different countries easier to do than if we were, a bunch of free agents or something like that. Like when I went to Korea, is because we already had a presence there, or the Philippines, or what have you. So I think that the Jesuits, because of their worldwide structure, will be well positioned to continue to do this. So that's one thought.
I think one of the things that Father Sosa, the current Superior General of the Jesuits, has brought is a focus through four what are described as universal apostolic preferences. So kind of ways to guide the apostolic work, the apostolates of the Jesuits worldwide, and they are showing the way to God through Ignatian spirituality, spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, walking with the excluded, journeying with youth, and care for our common home. So these are they're not they're intended to help kind of channel the focus of Jesuit institutions globally. But these are 4 things that Jesuits are talking about and lay collaborators are talking about worldwide and trying to integrate into the work of those structures that Father Bretsky described, all the way down to the actual Jesuit apostolates and the ministry of Jesuits and lay collaborators. So I think that's a really important thing. And the Jesuits have committed to these preferences for a period that'll last about another 8 years or so. So there's a fairly long-term commitment to allowing these to kind of influence the ministry of the Jesuits.
Yeah, I do think our international reach is perhaps our greatest asset, and it's why, frankly, sometimes you hear people say, "Oh, the Jesuits," disparaging way, but I think it's why, because we have guys. We have guys from all over the place who are challenging our way of looking at things, or forcing us to look at the problem a little bit differently. I couldn't fight the American church problems with quite as much passion and in quite the same way as I did once I lived in another place and saw that other people are asking much different questions, and maybe those things aren't quite as important as I thought they were. I do think that's an asset. As far as kind of the educational network, in Belize, for example, at our school, St. John's College, we've actually just begun a partnership with John Carroll. We don't give four-year degrees yet, maybe down the line, but we've started a partnership in business to where a Belizean who one of our students who can't go abroad to study, pretty much if you're going to go abroad to study, you have to get a scholarship. There's no way you're going to afford that on your own as a Belizean. So you have to get a full scholarship, and those are limited. So John Carroll has started a program in the business school for our students that is much cheaper. It's a fraction of what you would pay to go to John Carroll and study. And they actually do get to go up on campus a few times. So we're looking for more partnerships like that and finding them. We're also looking south to Latin America. We're working on a similar thing, perhaps in Guatemala at the Jesuit University Landívar in Guatemala City. And I just think in general, because of technology, these networks are growing, and there's a lot more communication among institutions and among Jesuits than there once was. There's cool opportunities for some synergies and new ways of thinking and new projects that we just weren't aware of before. I could give you several examples of those, but like migration, for example, is one Chris talked about earlier. We have a little new migration program that we're starting in Belize, because we do get a certain amount of migrants coming from other Central American countries, and Belize is a little more stable, sometimes a few more jobs. At least we don't have quite the violence that you might find in Tegucigalpa, in Honduras. If your family has a hit out on you from a gang, if like you have a shop, say in San Pedro Sula, Honduras, and the gangs have moved into the area and they want to take a bit in order to protect you, and you don't have the money to pay them, well, you have to flee or your family's going to be killed. So they may come to Belize as a place that they're actually losing some economic opportunity in favor of a little more political stability. I know a bunch of Belizeans like that. So we're trying to do things for those kind of people, but we're able to collaborate with Jesuits in Honduras, where they've come from, and we're able to collaborate a lot more with other parts of Latin America. And so I think those opportunities, we're only beginning to explore them. What technology allows us to do, we're only beginning to explore them in the past few years, but it's exciting to see where that might lead.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Father Bretsky talked about kind of the Jesuit structures that work kind of up and down from Rome to the local. But the Jesuits are also developing structures that work kind of across, kind of horizontally to address particular issues like access to higher education and secondary education, or to support people who are in migration, or to respond to the realities of climate change. So I was kind of on the migration front. I was sitting at a meeting in Mexico City a few years ago with colleagues engaged in work around migration from Jesuit works all the way from Canada to Colombia. And we were talking about the situation of people coming from South America, ending up in Canada, and we had people who could address both the direct service and ministry needs, people who were doing research on it, people who were doing advocacy related to the issues. We could look as a collective network. We could look at the reality of that individual person's experience of migration from all these different angles across nations, across parts of the region, and provide a great bit of support both to the non-governmental organization community as well as to the church community that's trying to support them throughout there. So the Jesuits are really well positioned throughout the world to be engaged in this way. And as Father Zippel points out, communication, the ability to interact across borders, without traveling even has only aided that.
Mm-hmm.
And I should have added, that John Carroll program wouldn't be possible were it not for virtual learning. They're not going to they're going to do most of their courses on computers. We even have a program now. We're starting down in that Maya region that I was talking about. There's 36 far-flung villages, 30 Catholic primary schools down there, and very little opportunity to advance beyond high school, even primary school. So we're starting from our main campus in Belize City. We're starting a satellite campus down there, entirely virtual. They don't have internet, and in fact, the village where we're going to base this program out of eventually doesn't even have electricity or internet right now. So we got to solve that. But in the meantime, they're going to a major town in the region, which takes them an hour or two to get to, depending on where they're from, maybe more. And they go into a building that we have there, and they've got computers there, and they can take classes from our main campus up in Belize City. We've got about 50 in this. This is the first year of it, the initial cohort, and those are folks who probably would not have any access to tertiary education, and now are going to be able to get an associate's degree thanks to technology. So there's cool opportunities that way.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah, and just so wonderful. I'm going to close here with, and I'll hold you to 1 minute each. Certainly, Christian faith has for millennia offered hope. So, how would you describe your hope for the future in terms of the work you've done, the experience you've brought, the people that you've experienced in so many different ways? How does your faith and your experience and your belief offer hope in the future of our world?
I'll go with the last line of Matthew's gospel, where Jesus says to go and make disciples. The Greek says pantata ethne, which is usually translated as all nations, but ethne really means ethnicities, all cultures. Go make disciples of all cultures, teaching them what I have taught you, and lo, I will be with you to the end of the age. That is the indefectibility of the church. That's the presence of the Spirit, and that is the ground of our Christian hope, and that's the ground of my hope too.
Thank you, Father. Thank you.
I think in the context of the sense of connectivity of the Jesuit and larger Ignatian network, it's it's how do we grow a community of people who are committed to being of service to one another. How do we grow a community of love?
For me, I think Pope Francis supposedly, when he does his international trips, he always visits the local Jesuit community. That's just one thing that he's done on every one of his international trips, wherever he's been. And he apparently always tells them in each place that he goes, please pray for Vatican II. Please pray that Vatican II will continue to be realized. Its vision will continue to be realized and implemented in the church. And I think Vatican II, it was not that long ago, 59 years ago, I think the council opened. 59 years ago, 2 days ago, Monday of this week. And that council really was about a church that was no longer European, a church that was now becoming global. And you look at the council fathers, I think it was still 80% or something pretty high from Europe and the West. But now you look at the College of Cardinals and it's radically changed and changing even more. It represents what has been going on in the church in far-flung places. So I think for me, it's the West has led for a long time, but now we're going to be led by other cultures and other local churches who are going to bring where the Spirit is very much active, in different ways. And those are going to be fed back into the global church. So for me, that's the really exciting thing to see what we're going to learn from local churches about how to do things a little bit differently. It gives me a lot of hope and excitement about where the church is headed.
Thank you so much. So we are at time. I want to thank you, the panelists. Thank you, Father Zippel. I'm going first with you on the end here. Father Bretsky, Chris, also Father Chaco, whose connection problems. Speaking of the beauty of the internet and difficulties, we lost him about 2/3 of the way through here, but thank him also. And thank you all so much for giving up more than an hour of your time and giving us these messages of learning of faith and hope across the world.
Thank you for great convening.
Yes, thanks so much, Mark. Great job.
And thanks to Global Cleveland for sponsoring all this. Wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you.